Armored Division annual reunion here in Abilene, Texas. We are here with Dot Todd, Dorothy Todd. She is the wife of a veteran that was part of the 12th, and she has several stories to tell us. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. If you can tell me your husband's name and when he was born and where.
My husband's name was Kenneth Todd, and he was born on June 2nd, 1922 in Easton, Pennsylvania. And we both attended the local high school, and we met in 1941 at the skating rink, and we started dating and started going steady. So then that was in June of 41, and then we were engaged the following year, and he was inducted into the Army. And we were married. Well, actually, we eloped. I went to Camp Campbell, and I was married in the chapel by the Catholic chaplain there. And I stayed there until he went on maneuvers in August.
In Tennessee?
In Tennessee. That was on August of 42, or 43. And then when he left to go on maneuvers, I went back home. And when I first went down to Tennessee, since we eloped, he didn't have any arrangements for me to where I was going to sleep, where I was going to stay. There was nothing like that. So when we got down to to Clarksville, I had no room. I didn't know where I was going to stay. He had to get back to camp that night because otherwise he would be AWOL. So I walked up to the bus station with him, and it just so happened that the guardian angel was with me because there was another couple there waiting for a bus. He had to go back to camp because he had broken his leg, and he was a cook, and he had to be back like at 4 o'clock in the morning to start breakfast. And so she said he had to take that last bus. So she asked me, you know, we were talking, and she asked me where I was staying. I said, I don't know. We went all over town, and nobody had a room. The USO couldn't help me. The Red Cross couldn't help me. We went to the hotel. They had no rooms. People were sleeping on the couches and on the chairs. And I was a very, very frightened young lady. I was scared to death. That's the first time I was ever away from home. But anyway, so this young girl said I could stay with her. And I stayed with her. And then the next day she took me around town, and she was working in a record shop. That's where they used to sell records. And she asked everybody. We couldn't find anything until she found this one woman, said I could stay at her house and sleep on her sofa. So I slept on her sofa for 3 days, and then I went uptown. Every day I went uptown looking and asking everybody if they knew anybody that had a room for rent. And I happened to go into 5 and 10, and this one clerk said one of her friends was moving out of her house. So I went up to the house and I got a room. So then I stayed there in Clarksville until the end of August. We were married the first week of July at camp. And then, as I say, then I went back home when he went on maneuvers. So then he came home in December for Christmas. And by then, well, he had a room rented for me to go back with him. So we had this room with Mrs. Hill, and that was on Graham Street, and she was a gem. She was the most wonderful person you'd ever want to meet. She had 4 rooms that she rented out to service couples. She had a son in the Air Force and a daughter that was in college in Alabama. And as I say, we each had a bedroom, and we shared a kitchen, and we all shared the bath, including Mrs. Hill. Mrs. Hill had her own living quarters, but we got along fine. We never ever had any problem, you know, with the kitchen or anything like that in the bathroom. It was just great. So I was down here until September when they shipped out to go overseas. So the one couple that was in the room next to us, we got to be very, very dear friends, and we're friends to this day. They were from Syracuse, New York, and we've been friends ever since we met, and we hit it off so well in Abilene. So we did about the same thing, you know, just sat around the house, and Mrs. Hill taught us to crochet, and she showed us how to sew different things. She just was a gem. So anyway, so Peg and I we didn't work. All we had was the $29 a month allotment that we got from the government. And of course our husband's pay, well, that was like $60 a month at that time. So of course, you know, we did all right. Mrs. Hill charged us $8 a week for the room. So, I mean, we didn't have any other expenses or anything because none of us had a car. So of course we walked uptown almost every night. We went to the movies an awful lot, to the Paramount. And so then Peg and I before I met Peg, I was there in January of 43. That's when we first went to Abilene. And I didn't meet Peg until they came in April. But before she came, I started working at the Wooten Hotel as a chambermaid. And I think I worked there 3 weeks. And I didn't like doing that kind of work, so I quit. So then when Peg and I, like I say, we used to go uptown and everything, we both decided, well, we needed some extra money, so we'd look for a job. Well, we started working in the cafeteria. She was at the steam table and I was at the salad bar. And after we worked, I guess we worked about 3 weeks, and she says, "You feel like working?" I said, "No, I don't. Let's go home." So we'd quit that job. So then we'd have money for a while. Then when we decided we had to go to work again, we worked in the peanut factory. And I saw that peanut factory today. The girl that brought us to the museum, she drove around and she took us down to where the peanut factory used to be and to the egg factory where we used to work. Peg and I both worked at the egg factory. What we did was we broke eggs and we separated the yolks from the whites because they made powdered eggs from them and sent them overseas. So we worked there, I think, the longest. At the cafeteria, that was all right, but we didn't care too much for it. We didn't get paid that well, and you know, nobody ever left any tips. Mm-hmm. So I think we only worked there about a month. But we stayed at the egg factory about 3 months.
And how long at the peanut factory?
The peanut factory, that was before we went to the egg factory. That was between the cafeteria and the egg factory. We probably worked there about a month because that man that hired us, we worked on a conveyor belt, and these peanuts would come down, and we had to pick out all the bad peanuts. We weren't allowed to talk, not even say anything to each other. We couldn't talk. And he'd stand like at the end, at that end of the conveyor, and there were 4 of us on this one conveyor. And as this conveyor is coming down with these peanuts, we're picking these peanuts out, you know, and as we're did you ever see that I Love Lucy show with the chocolates? Well, every time I see that, I think of these peanuts. We didn't eat them, but we'd probably get fired. But that lasted about, I would say, about a month. Because when we got finished, we got a break, that 10-minute break. But you know, when you have your head down like that and this conveyor is going all this time, you look up and all of a sudden you feel like you're on a merry-go-round and you're so dizzy. So that lasted about a month. So then we went to the egg factory, and I think we stayed there then until September. And I would say it must have been at least 3 months that we worked there. But there again, we worked part-time, like from 3 to 9 in the afternoon till 9 at night. And our guys would come in from camp around 5:30, and we always packed a small lunch for our break. And we'd go outside and sit on the porch, like a porch, and we'd sit there and eat our lunch. And our guys would come down, maybe sit there a while with us, and then sometimes they'd go home. Sometimes we'd look at each other and, do you feel like working? No, let's go home. So we'd go home. I said we never got fired because I guess they needed us. But it was fun. So that was really, it was the nicest year of our whole life because we had nothing to do as far as any responsibilities, and Mrs. Hill was such a gem. She always had a dessert for us that she'd take and put it in our kitchen on the table. She let us have all the eggs we wanted because she had about 8 or 10 chickens out in the roost, you know, in the back pen. And one time she was going to, Ken and I were the, I won't say the oldest in age, but we were there the longest of anybody. So when she was going to Alabama, to Tuscaloosa, to visit with her daughter for 2 weeks. So she said she was leaving me in charge of the chickens. We could use all the eggs we wanted, just so we'd had at least a dozen for her when she came home, because she was going to be gone for 2 weeks. So all we had to do was feed the chickens and see that the coops were locked at night. Well, I don't know anything about chickens. I've never been on a farm. I don't know anything about them. So the first evening, I said to Ken, what are we going to do about those chickens? He said, why? I said, how are we going to get them to go in the coop and stay in the coop and close the door by the time we get a couple of them in the coop? The other ones are going to be running out. There's no way I'm going to touch a chicken. He said, well, I don't know. So then Peg came over to our room, and she said, what's going on? I said, Peg, I don't know how we're going to get those chickens in the coop. She said, what do you mean get them in the coop? They are in the coop. I said, well, how are we going to get them in the cages so they stay in the cage at night? She said, don't you know anything about chickens? I said, no, I don't. She said, they just automatically go in and roost. You don't have to do anything. So that was it. I learned something. But we did. We had all the eggs we wanted. And as I say, the other couple, Ellen and Wayne, they were from Georgia, and they were really farm people. And every Sunday morning, Ellen made breakfast, biscuits and eggs and bacon, and she always made bacon gravy. Well, I never heard of bacon gravy. So one day when I walked in the kitchen and Wayne was eating, I said, Ellen, what did you make? She said, bacon and eggs. And I said, but what's he have on his biscuits? Oh, that's gravy. I said, oh, what kind of gravy did you make? Oh, she made bacon gravy. I said, I never heard of that. But then she let me taste it. And from then on, she always had bacon gravy for me on a Sunday morning because I didn't know how to make gravy. I didn't even know how to cook. So, but we got by. And Peg knew how to cook. So between the two of us, we got our guys fed okay. So that was about the gist of our time down here, which were, I'll tell you, they were the happiest days of our life. We just had a ball. And then the guys were going to be shipped out. So around the 16th of September, Peg and I got on the bus, and it took us 4 days to get home. I live in Pennsylvania, and she lived in New York State. But she came home with me because the last we heard from the guys, they were going to be shipping out from New York. but they didn't know where they were going. They didn't know when. So they said they would call us from New York, if they could call us, and, you know, then Peg could maybe go see Don. So that's what happened. We got home on a Thursday. We left on a Monday, and we got home on Thursday. And sure enough, Saturday morning, Don called, and Peg got on a bus, and she left and went to New York so she could spend the weekend with Don, and then she left from there to go home to Syracuse. And that afternoon, then Ken called me, and I wasn't able to get a bus out. There was no bus that would get me in New York until 10 o'clock at night. And then I would have to, he couldn't stay in town that late to meet me. So I never did get to see him. So he went overseas, and I didn't see him until he came home. And he was in combat. They went to England in September of '44, and then they went over to France the beginning of December. And Ken was only in combat till January the 19th, and he was hit at Herlesheim. They had a big battle there at Herlesheim, and he was hit with shrapnel, and that was the end of his war days. But he was in the hospital there in France for about 3 weeks, and then they shipped him to England, and he was in a hospital in England, and I got a notification, you know, from the War Department about him being wounded. I was working at a defense plant at the time, and in those days, when they sent you a telegram, they wouldn't hand it to anyone except the recipient. So they took the telegram to my home, where my mother and dad, and they wouldn't give her the telegram. They just told her there was a telegram for me. Well, my mother was hysterical, and she begged them, no, no, no. So he came to the plant where I was working, and the woman from the office came out, and she said, Dot, she said, will you come back to the office for a minute? And I thought, oh boy, what did I do now? So when I went back in, this man was there, and she said, just sit down. And she said, and we just want you to know everything, not to get excited. There's a telegram here for you. Well, that's all she had to say. I was hysterical. I said, oh, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Don't tell me. Don't tell me. And then she says to me, well, there's no star on it. So, because if he had been killed, there'd be a star on the envelope. And she said, there's no star on it, so it isn't that he's been killed. He's probably wounded. So then they did read it to me and said that he was seriously wounded and that he was being shipped to a hospital in France. Well, this was in February when I got that notice. That's how long it took them to, the first week of February. And then I got a V-mail from him from England, and then, as I say, then I just wrote to him there, and he came back to the States. I think it was the end of March, and then he was in a hospital in Virginia, because he was hit with shrapnel. It went into his neck and came out of his back, so he had a big hole in his back. It never covered up. There was always this big, what should I say? It was as if someone took a scalpel and sliced it out. But he was very fortunate. He never really had any problems, you know, after that. After it healed, he did have that ugly scar on his neck, and the doctor, they told him that he was very fortunate that it didn't hit the vein, the main artery.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he would have been killed. But thank God he was all right. And the only thing was he didn't have the strength in his left arm that he would normally have, but he never really had any problem. He worked in an iron factory when he came home, and then he put his name in the post office, and he became a letter carrier, and he carried mail then for 30-some years. So that was the gist of our life. We have 3 children. I have a son and 2 daughters. My son lives in Portland, Oregon. He has 2 children. And my one daughter lives in Denver, Colorado. She has a daughter. And the other daughter, my youngest one, lives with me, and she has a daughter. She's divorced, and she lives with me. And now we have 3 great-grandchildren.
Tell me the names of your children.
My children, my son is Kenneth. We call him Bud because he's not a junior. They have different middle names. We call him Bud. And my second one is Carol. Her name is Carol Waltz now, W-A-L-T-Z. And she lives right outside of Denver, Colorado. And Donna's name is Detweiler, and she's divorced. She's been divorced, at least 13, 14 years. And she has 1 daughter and 2 grandchildren, 2 grandsons. And my son has a granddaughter, so I have 3 great-grandchildren. Very nice. I love them. So I don't know what else I could tell you. And my husband worked at the post office for 30, what was it? I think it was 31, 32 years. And then he retired in 1979. And we had a small grocery store, like just a corner store, you know, a mom and pop store. We had that for 10 years, and then we closed. And we just took it easy, you know. And in 1992, Ken came down with a brain tumor, and he was operated on November the 30th of 92. And we had planned to go out to my son for Christmas that year. And of course, we didn't make it. He died in December of 92.
I'm so sorry.
So we were married 49.5 years. We were really looking forward to our 50th wedding anniversary, and so were the kids, because they had everything planned for a party for us, but it never came to be. So, but I thank God we had a good life together. So, and we have 3 beautiful children and 4 wonderful grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. That's the only thing that I wish that he could see would be the 3 great-grandchildren, because he's crazy about children, and his grandchildren were his pride and joy. So I just feel bad that he didn't see any of them, but I think he's looking down at him.
Yeah,
So,
probably.
I don't know what else I could tell you.
Well, that's
Now
great.
I'm just retired. I flip-flop, I go to Denver, I go to Colorado, and to Oregon and visit with them. I was just out to Oregon last month because my great-granddaughter was 7 years old, so I wanted to be there for her birthday. And I decided to come to Abilene when they had this reunion here. I had planned to come when they dedicated the museum 3 years ago. As a matter of fact, I had my plans made because my granddaughter in Denver got married in September, the week after the Trade Center was bombed. And I was flying out to her wedding. I had planned to fly to her wedding, and then from Denver I was going to come down to Abilene for the reunion. But the beginning of September I had a heart problem, and my cardiologist told me I had to have a triple bypass. So I said, well, I didn't want to have it until after I came home from the wedding. I said, I'm not missing that wedding. He said, you know, you could have a heart attack. I said, well, I'll take my chances because I'm not going to miss. I said to him, if I have the bypass, am I going to be okay to go to Denver? He said, well, ordinarily, I would say yes, but you never know. He says, so he says, and how old are you? I said, well, I'm 79. So he said, well, it's up to you. It's a decision for you to make. So my granddaughter and my daughter spoke with him, and my granddaughter says to him, well, if it were your mother, what would you say to her? And he said, oh, that's not a fair question. And she said, well, I'm asking you, what would you tell her? He said, I'd tell her she should go. So I said, okay, then I'm going to Denver and for the wedding. But he said, will you be back the 1st of October? I said, yes. And that's when he scheduled my heart operation, the first week of October. So I had to cancel my trip to Abilene. Now, if I had come to Abilene at that time, I'd see my house, because my house, that's one thing I wanted to see, is where we lived. And that's the main thing I wanted to see before anything. And when I went out there today, there's no house. It was torn down last year. And I said, oh, if I would have been here 3 years ago, I would have seen it. I wanted to take a picture of it, because I haven't been back, you know, to Abilene at all since we left that September 44. So I was really anxious to see the house. And the man that lives next door, I better get going. The man that lives next door, we stopped the car and I saw there was no house, and the one house was 865 and the other one is 881, and I saw him and I said, excuse me, isn't there an 873 Graham Street? He says, oh, used to be over here. He said, they bulldozed it and knocked it down. I said, oh no, my house. I wanted to see it so bad. It was such a beautiful place. It was 4 big rooms, bedrooms, and Mrs. Hill had her own living quarters. She had her own kitchen, and hers was like a living room and a bedroom combination. But we all shared the same bath. But the 4 couples had our own kitchen. We each had a space, a shelf in the refrigerator, and a shelf in the kitchen cabinet, and in the closet. We each had a shelf there. It was up to us to keep the kitchen clean and everything. And she had pots and pans and dishes and everything there. So we really had a great time down here. So we have a lot of good memories.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
well, thank you so much. We really appreciate all of your time and your stories.
I really enjoyed being down here. I just wish I would have seen my house. Or the week before we left, she says, now be sure to take a picture of our house and send it to me. I said, I will. Now I have to tell her there's no house. It's just an empty lot.